1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Class Bravo is back. We're an aviation podcast for aviation professionals and enthusiasts alike with two hosts, Ray Gardner.
Hey, everyone.
And me, Cory Clark. Now, Ray decided to...
I got hitched, guys. I'm wearing the world's smallest pair of handcuffs. So...
But he is enjoying his first.
I love my wife. I love my wife very, very much. I'm not saying that to be a bad guy. I do love my wife very much.
And I decided to move 1,000 miles away. So now we're in two completely different cities. And Ray and I, we've been talking and we're thinking about changing things up with the podcast.
Absolutely. We're trying to be a little more conversational instead of so scripted and reading from a page. So hopefully you guys like what we've decided to do with the podcast.
And I think it'll just, help the conversation, flow better. And really, if we want to go into a certain area, we can go wherever we want with the conversation.
Right. And we want y'all to be entertained and also want to chime in when you can on our different formats and platforms. So we want everybody to be in this conversation. It's not just us two.
Exactly. And we've both been thinking about how we can get other people on the podcast. So we are trying to look at, maybe interviews with some other people and even, students, not just professionals.
Right. Exactly. We don't want to be pigeonholed to just professionals. We want the enthusiasts alike because we know y'all have a lot to contribute as well.
Yeah. And since our last podcast, there has been, an incredible amount of aviation news and developments and changes, companies being bought and sold and mergers and,
right.
Maybe Ray knows something about that, but
if you're in the airline industry, I was told when I first got into the industry that you're going to go through at least a merger or an acquisition at some point in your career. You cannot avoid it. And sure enough, already going through it early in my career. So I can say that I can check that on my list. Things I've experienced in the industry.
It's one of those bucket list items, right?
Yes. Cutting your teeth, right? Cutting your teeth. So absolutely.
Exactly. I think one of the biggest things that happened this past week or so, or this past month, has been with Airbus. And, the A380, it was kind of, the next big thing in aviation. It was supposed to be, the new queen of the skies taking over for the 747. And I guess they failed. They can't really keep producing them because there's no more orders.
Yeah, so in one of our previous episodes, we had talked about just markets in general and kind of the world landscape as it is or the demographics, excuse me. When you look at Asian markets, you've got a lot of people coming and going. So that makes sense to fly a lot of people there. But when you're looking at the actual, users, the patrons of the 380, like Qatar and all those different Middle Eastern carriers, they're not full flights, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to fly something that big. So I know you had mentioned in our previous conversation about it, just looking at, you could put two aircraft right next to each other, same size, with the same amount of people that would equal a 380, and you're going to get your money back there. So I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah. So when we had looked at, the cost per seat mile and everything and the revenue and,
right,
and how much you could fly, and I believe it was the 787-800 series, I believe, you could fly two of those, on the same exact route as the A380 and make more money from those two airplanes. So why would you put a larger aircraft on that when your CASM or, cost per seat mile is the exact same as, or, more efficient as the A380? But I think I think Airbus though has an even bigger issue than the A380 because you've got, negative sales for January. Airbus, had no new orders in January and they had a net loss of 13. But the thing that really surprised me is that it wasn't just A380s that they were losing orders for, which ultimately led to its demise, but the new and huge debacle with the A220, formerly the C series, 100 and 300. They actually lost 5 orders for it. So Canada. Oh, it's not Canada. Sorry, I thought it was Air Canada, but they're just saying it was recently acquired from Canada's Bombardier. It was actually, they 5 of the smallest model, so the 110, were canceled. So, I think they actually have a bigger issue. But Airbus compared to Boeing, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I see Airbus as one of those companies that is propped up by governments. The French has poured money. The French government has poured money into it. The owners of it is, it's a European Union type deal where they're trying to prop it up. It's the same thing that happened with, Bombardier is, Canada threw money into it and to develop this new airplane, and nobody was buying it.
Well, they couldn't get past getting any orders for it, and they couldn't get the 300 series off the ground. I think we looked at that too, is that, they had maiden flights and test flights for the 100, the C series 100, but the 300 was taking so long. And then that's when Airbus stepped in and said, we're going to take this over basically. So, and then after you do that, you get Boeing throwing their hat into the ring and saying, no, we don't think that's right. So, yeah, they faced complications since the inception of that particular series of aircraft, and then you add the 380 on top of it. It's just that's a situation that I don't necessarily would want. I know I wouldn't want to be in. So.
Absolutely not, especially when you spend $25 billion to develop. That's how much an A380 cost to develop, and it's only been on sale for a little less than 20 years. There's something wrong with that.
And even like Qantas had an order of 20 originally, and they're not going to take any more. They're only going to have a fleet of 12. So now you're looking at this particular carrier is not going to have a full fleet that you expected. So now you're looking at parts and everything else that go along with that to sustain that operation or that particular fleet type. You're not getting as many aircraft out there. So that revenue from parts and maintenance is not being generated either. So
and these airplanes aren't very cheap either. So a cancellation of 8, if you look at the list prices, you're looking at $500 million each. That's almost $4 billion right there in lost revenue for Airbus.
Exactly.
I don't know. That's a lot of money, especially when it costs you $25 billion to develop an airplane that, quite literally, there has not been a single U.S. carrier to operate it.
Right. Exactly. So I don't know where Airbus goes from here. I know they're going to have to cancel the 380, but do they take their time and now focus on the 350 and their smaller types like the A220 now, and especially with Delta taking on several of those aircraft? Is that where you shift your focus, is to a more narrow body style aircraft? Where do they go from here?
I think that, the A220 is it's a good up gauge for regional, what used to be operated by regional carriers, where instead of operating, 2 aircraft on that, in hour intervals, perhaps they throw a 220 on it and bring that flying in-house, especially with how we're seeing the industry shake up I think you're going to see the 220 actually adopted by more airlines in the United States for that reason. And Boeing really they need to come out with a new aircraft to compete with it.
I agree.
The 737 is a great airplane. It's got 7,000 orders for it or something along those lines.
United's taking 20 new 738s this year, I think. Yeah, so they're getting some orders for sure.
Yeah, and I mean Boeing, I definitely see them seeing what's going on with Airbus, with the 220, with these new aircraft coming out, and I could see them making some big announcements here, maybe not next year or this year, but in the next 5 years, having a big competitor. But one of the things, and I really haven't seen it talked about everywhere, is look at the new airplanes coming out in China. And I don't have the article or the names out of it, but there is a company in China starting to manufacture aircraft. And when you look at this aircraft, a picture of it, and you put it up to a Boeing 737, right, I couldn't tell the difference between the two.
Really?
And I think it's a classic example of how China is copying products everywhere that's being created in the United States, right? So we create technology.
Make it cheaper too.
They're creating their own because they don't have development costs. They're just reverse engineering what we did.
Exactly.
I think Boeing and Airbus, even though I don't like them because they're kind of a subsidized company, we're seeing new competitors that Boeing is going to have to compete against, Embraer is going to have to compete against, and it should be interesting.
Right. Yeah, I think ultimately that's always, in my opinion, better for the market is you have more options. So, of course, that's going to help with pricing and, whatever you need to sustain growth.
Absolutely.
Especially with certain companies that are bringing on new aircraft types or wanting to refresh their fleet. I mean, that's what everybody wants, right? You want to lower your fuel cost. You want more efficient aircraft. You want to fly farther. You want all the new avionics that can come equipped. So overall, I think it's better for the industry with competitors. Now, are we getting the same quality? Who knows? I guess we're just going to have to wait and see on that.
Exactly. And this is leaving commercial aviation as we know it, but it's still a commercial aviation sort of, is if you look at Uber Elevate and the product they're trying to develop, it's kind of like a last mile type concept is, picking up people on rooftops, delivering them into hubs, scattered around cities, more point to point. Flying.
Right.
It's not, long haul. And when I say point to point, I'm talking like point to point under 20 minutes type.
You're looking at like Manhattan, the bigger cities. Yeah.
Manhattan, LA, Boston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Chicago. But I think one of the things that the airlines are not doing, which they really, it would make sense, is once there is a final product developed and a feasible, delivery method, and by that I mean aircraft, will we start to see airlines creating last mile transportation? Will they start creating that long haul and short haul and micro transport from the airport to the hub that's a 5-minute walk from their condo in Chicago or in New York City?
I think especially when you're looking at your business types, that's definitely something that they want. I mean, that was something that we saw with Delta and their agreement with Blade in New York City was, oh, hey, you need to get out of Manhattan, you need to get to JFK or LaGuardia. Well, we'll take you by helicopter and get you there. So I think that's the next frontier in the industry. Because we go from, when you look at I was just listening the other day to a podcast about Southwest and how they got generated. They were looking at just flying within the state of Texas. That just kind of blew up, right? People weren't expecting that, and it worked really well. took a long while to get there and go through a lot of legal battles to get to where they could operate the way they wanted to. But I think that's where all of your entrepreneurs and your idealists, that's where you get those next steps in the industry, is from those crazy ideas.
Agreed. And I mean, let Uber spend all the money to develop these products that anybody can buy,
exactly.
And let's step in and let's get that going next. And maybe what American, Delta, United, JetBlue, maybe instead of taking it on themselves, creating a consortium or creating a spin-offs, kind of like what's with Sabre with American Airlines, and putting that out there.
Exactly.
But I think, if you look 10 years down the road or, down the sky, you'll see that some of these airlines are just not going to innovate, and some are. And the ones that are they're going to be the ones that, become the largest in the industry.
Or they're the ones that are going to innovate, and the bigger airlines are going to buy them so that they can get their resources. So
more consolidation.
Exactly. So I think that's either way, that's what we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 years for sure.
Well, and then the question is with the FAA, you have, a pilot per aircraft, etc. So that brings us into a whole nother issue, right? So we start getting all these micro airplanes. And when I say micro, I mean, 3-4 passenger airplanes.
Right.
So now you're going to have how many pilots? You're going to need, right now we're already short pilots, but going forward, we're going to need even more.
Plus the mechanics to go along with maintaining those fleets.
Exactly. And there's a service out there, and I know you know about it because you went to school to become a helicopter pilot and somehow changed that. I'll let you get into it if you want. But we have Medevac helicopters that are also short pilots. We have, there's no real steady supply of pilots for fixed wing or for helicopters.
It really is difficult to maintain. I mean, one of my professors that I had at UND, she's been quoted as saying, I mean, you look at the industry, let me pull up the exact quote, but the common theme is that while the fixed wing industry has those defined pilot career paths, or CPPs, those don't exist in the helicopter industry. And she's exactly right. You don't get to go to school thinking, okay, I choose UND because they have a career path to United. I can go to UND and then get picked up by a regional carrier, fly there for a couple of years, get my PIC time, and then move on to United or Delta or American or whoever. Helicopters don't work that way. You don't have these major corporations. There are a few within the U.S. that are a little bit bigger than others, like PHI and a few others. But they haven't gotten to that point yet where they're building those type of career paths. So I know, okay, so fixed wing you mentioned, right? So you can build up your hours for the 1,500 hour rule, which we'll talk about later, but right.
You can build that, by being a certified instructor, banner towing, little things. It's not, earth shattering, you're making tons of money type jobs.
Right.
It's, you're grinding out to try and finish it. But what is there in helicopters? I mean, I don't see helicopters flying everywhere in Dallas. I see, a few GA airplanes, but I don't see a helicopter everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the whole industry's changed, and I'll kind of touch on some of this towards the end of this. But for me, as you mentioned earlier, my whole intent in the aviation industry was to be a helicopter pilot. It's always been my dream to be, more specifically, a Medevac pilot. And for me, I had to pick a school that actually, I wanted a 142 school that I could get the curriculum, the ground school, and a degree along with that to get my certificates. And it's really, really expensive for helicopters. Not only are the CFIs expensive, CFI's time, but just
give us an idea of what it costs for an hour of instruction.
An hour instruction total is about $600. And
holy mackerel.
Yeah, that was on the Schweitzer 300, which is not the most popular in the training environment. Most schools, helicopter schools, are using either a Robinson 22, 44, or 66. UND just got a 66, the cadet, back in, I guess it was a year and a half ago or so, and then they just picked up their second one to add to their fleet. But they've used the Schweitzer 300 for many years now, and it's pretty expensive. So yeah, $600 an hour, and it can depend, right? I mean, you look at your log once you get back on the pad, and okay, I flew for an hour and a half. That's going to be pretty pricey today, on top of fuel, on top of the CFI's time. It adds up.
But $600 per hour, whereas I just pulled up a local flight school here in Dallas, and for 1 hour in a 152, all costs included, you're looking at $97 per hour.
Exactly, and that's only going to increase the deficit that we're already seeing in the helicopter industry. We're at about, I think it's around 6,700 pilots, almost 7,000 pilots, and that's for that industry alone. Looking at Medevac and those types of professional helicopter pilots. And another thing too is you got to pay for all of that. And then those that are going to a 142, like UND, you've also got your degree that you're paying for. So you've got 4 years in an undergraduate program. I was there for my master's. I wasn't there for undergraduate, thankfully. But, if they're going for their bachelor's degree, they're going to have 4 years of tuition and books and all this other stuff, plus their flying time, plus their stage checks, plus their check rides. The check rides are separate because you have to have, an FAA inspector go up with you. Now at UND, they have those certified that work at the school to do that, so you don't have to bring in anybody from the FSDO or whatever. So, but you have to go through all of that. And once you get through with 4 years, or however long it takes you, especially in UND with their adverse weather conditions, however long it takes you to get those certificates, then you got to move on. You get your private, your instrument, your commercial, your CFI, your CFII, and then you're a CFI for 3, 4, 5 years, trying to build up 1,000 hours.
And how much money does and I don't know, maybe you don't know this, but how much money does a CFI make in a year?
That I can't tell you an exact number, but I will tell you from those that I flew with, I knew that they were struggling to make ends meet. And I mean, they're flying every day. There's some of these guys, I mean, they're going right up to their limit. How long can they be in that aircraft? They're flying as much as they can, getting as many students as they can to make that time. And if you hustle, and some of the guys I know, they really worked their rear ends off to get stuff done. Some of them are getting through in 2-3 years, but I mean, still that's
rare.
But that's rare. And you've already been at that school for 4 years, getting your degree and learning how to fly. Now you got to stay there another couple of years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, just to get your 1,000 hours PIC time.
And here's another thing. So you have people going through these pilots going through, right, to become helicopter pilots, very specifically. And I'm looking at this article that you found from UND, and it's actually Vertical Magazine. And one of the quotes says, in 2017 alone, 500 rotary pilots transitioned through their programs. And when I say their programs, it's regional airlines with a 95% completion rate. That was at just 3 of these airlines. So there was 500 pilots, helicopter pilots, that decided to go fixed wing now.
Yep.
So you guys are getting hit from all sides. I mean,
exactly.
You've got rotary pilots that either can't find a job or can't survive on CFI pay that are switching to fixed wing aircraft. And these are the same people that are flying, supposed to be out there flying Medevac helicopters and some of the other helicopters that are used, for the oil rigs, etc.
Right.
And we're running out of pilots.
We are. Back to the period, we were kind of talking about the career path. You mentioned Medevac and oil rigs. Even those guys, you have to get to 2,500 hours PIC time before they'll even consider you.
So is the only way to build 2,500 hours is to be a CFI, or what are the other, what are the things that people do to build time?
The most popular is tour operators. So when you look at a lot of the guys that I know that were my CFIs, moved down to the Las Vegas area doing tours over the Hoover Dam and just Las Vegas as well. And then you've got the folks over in the Smoky Mountains, Gatlinburg, Tennessee area. So you've got those type of tour operations. And then you got all the little operators like Myrtle Beach. They fly, the R44s and 66s over the beach, and same on the West Coast down in LA and those other areas. But that's the main thing is tour operation. And once you get through that, then you kind of have your choice. Some guys want to go and do firefighting and, over in the Western states. And then some guys want to do police
like
work.
CAL FIRE.
Yeah, CAL FIRE. And then you've got police work like Atlanta PD. They've got a couple of helicopters that they fly. But those guys, those specific ones, you're looking at very high amount of hours, 2,500, 3,000 hours. You've got line work that a lot of guys do. And those are 4,000 hours. You're right next to power lines. You've got to have very clean and precise control of that helicopter. So they're looking at the guys that have the most hours. And now, kind of transitioning into our current industry, you add in small UASs. You've got those taking up jobs of what helicopters have done in the past, like movie production. A lot of times you'd have to have a helicopter for aerial footage. Well, now you can get really good shots with a drone. And so that's kind of taking some of that out of the industry.
At a tenth of the cost.
You have a small device that is not hard to maintain. You break a little propeller on it, you go to the store or order it online, and it's fixed. No big deal.
And these little drones, you don't need a mechanic.
No, you can do it yourself, or you go purchase a new one when it breaks. It's something that, I hope it doesn't break that often, but you can get $1,000 drone, and the video production is just amazing. We've seen that with your drone. You can just do whatever you want.
And mine's not even, a really fancy one. It's one of the consumer,
exactly.
Mavic Air, the really small one, and that's shooting 4K footage and
right.
The same quality as what a helicopter. Obviously it's not the best camera out there, but you can't really tell the difference when you put them side by side.
Exactly. And that's the other thing I was going to say about the training environment is now schools are starting to build curriculum around UAS. So UND has a program for UAS operators, folks that can go overseas and do some work as contractors. A lot of them get their start with their program at the school. So you see a lot of the folks that wanted to be helicopter pilots also dabble in UAS. I've got a buddy that's finishing up at UND that he has his degree in, I can't remember the name of the program, but it's the UAS program. He didn't get his in commercial aviation like most others do. His is in UAS, but he took his lessons for helicopter, so he's got that as well. So he's combining the two together. That way he can cover himself, basically. So, that ultimately, in my opinion, is probably the best way to go. Is that if you want to be a helicopter pilot, you got to have something to support you on the side, whatever that is, because it's a long road to get there.
So we'll wrap this part up with this. Here's a question for you. How much money does it take to go from nothing to commercial helicopter pilot?
That depends. There are several variables there. How long does it take you to get through all your lessons? I won't be specific with mine, but I will tell you that I only have my private certificate right now, and it took me a year to get, a full year, 12 months, and I am paying back heavily in student loans for that.
So this isn't like what a fixed wing pilot pays, where it's probably going to cost $10,000 to get your private pilot's license and another 20 to get all your ratings. This is upper five figures.
Yes, or more.
That's incredible, especially once you add in the college degree. Most of these colleges are giving you a degree in professional pilot degree, right. And it's like, what can I do with this? So I think what you said, it hits it right on the head, is you have to have a backup. You shouldn't go and just focus on being a pilot, but also get a degree that is in UAS or in airport management or in something that you have a fallback on as well.
Exactly, or in my case, aviation safety. So that's the next step. Is SMSs everywhere. The airlines are already dealing with it. 135s are starting to implement it. Your 142 schools are also implementing it. UND has an SMS program. And then your Part 139 airports are doing it as well. So, finding that niche outside of just being a pilot or just being a mechanic or whatever also helps, having that extra background. So.
And one other big point is when people go and they're becoming a pilot and they want to become a helicopter pilot or anything in the aviation industry. I think one of the things that people don't see is that aviation is unlike any other industry. Things change every day. But there's also a very small amount of companies that do what we do, right? You have American, Delta, United, you have Medevac companies. They're not on every corner.
Right.
And if you're not willing to move and you're not willing to uproot your life, it's going to be very hard for you to find a job. I know several people that went to an aviation school. They got, bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in aviation, except they are dead set on living in one city and only that city, and they'll never move out of that city. Mm-hmm. Well, there is a finite amount of jobs in that city, and you're one out of maybe 1,000 people that are applying for that job. And if you're not willing to move, you're going to have a really hard time getting employed.
Especially at the majors. I mean, you got your regionals that are kind of spread out across the country, which is great. But when you're looking at, like you said, Delta, American, United, you're looking at 3 specific cities. And like you said, it's very difficult because you're one among thousands applying for that job. So, yeah, the industry's tough. I mean, you got to be willing to relocate and chase the dream if that's really what you want.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that we've been hitting on is the mechanic issue with helicopters. But we're also seeing that at the airlines. And I know, from my experience at the regionals and now at the main lines, how difficult it is to find people to be mechanics.
Yes. Well, just the other day, I live in Atlanta, home of the famous Delta, and I was just driving around my town, and there was a commercial for mechanics. And I'm seeing that to pop up, specifically airline mechanics, and especially here, they're posting all the time. And that one, they're trying to get you to hear what you want to hear, which is, hey, you can make up to $70,000 as a mechanic. What they don't tell you in that marketing ploy is how much it takes to get to that point, because that's maybe starting out at a mainline. Once you get to that point, first you got to go through your school, you got to get your A&P, pass all your tests, then you've got to go to regional, build time, cut your teeth, and then after all of that, get your chance at the mainline. So they're trying to get people in, but and it's hard because you don't want to tell them the whole truth because you don't want to disparage them from following that. But
and I think that's an issue that we see in every industry,
absolutely,
especially
absolutely.
like college degrees. And I mean, we could talk about, this for an hour where, why are they trying to get people to get a degree where there are no jobs? But
Exactly.
in aviation, we need maintenance people so bad that we're seeing all these commercials pop up, but it's not an overnight process. You don't just get your AMP in a week or a month like some of these other careers where you can get a certificate in that short amount of time. And to become an AMP, you're looking at 2 years. And then at that, you still have to go through, and really it's kind of like OJT, on the job training where, okay, now that you're out of school and you learned how to fix exactly what they told you is wrong with it, now you need to figure out what is wrong with it. You need to be able to diagnose the issue. And, you go through a process. And I mean, again, a lot of people don't want to move. They don't want to do this kind of work. I mean, when I walk through facilities, whether it's a regional, a mainline, or a private, I'm looking at a population of people that are very close to retiring. I mean, the workforce right now, it's the same with the pilots and air traffic control. We've got an aging workforce, and we're going to be in pain. And commercial travel, yeah. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of pilots do we need?
And then the thousands more mechanics that we need.
Exactly.
It definitely is hurting, especially in a world now where you can be a YouTube star and you can work from anywhere in the world and make money if you have the creative prowess to do that. That we're in a very remote style work environment now, and a lot of people want that, and you can't necessarily get it depending on what market you're trying to enter, especially the commercial airline. You just can't do that.
Absolutely. And I think, you look at millennials, you look at how many people are actually going, our generation under us, how many people are actually getting their pilot's license or even interested in flying. I mean, you go out there and, people don't look at flying, whether it's a helicopter or an airplane, the same way as people did 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you could find probably 2-3 people out of 10 that were like, yeah, I want to go flying. I want to get my license. It's the most impressive thing ever. And now it's not glorified anymore. It's not.
That it's the same thing. Like my wife, when she's talking to people, she may tell, because they'll ask her in her job. She deals with a lot of people one-on-one every day. They'll ask her, hey, what does your husband do? And she'll say, well, he's in aviation safety. He's a safety manager, and then he also has his helicopter license. And a lot of people are like, oh, he's a helicopter pilot. That's cool. And that's the end of the conversation. They don't want to know any more about it. It's okay, he does something in safety and he's got a pilot license, and that's cool small talk for a little bit, and then it's on to the next thing. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's not glorified. I 100% agree with you on that.
And times are changing, just like you said earlier. And the airlines, the Medevac companies, the banner towing companies are all going to be facing, and we already are, but they're going to be facing an even bigger storm here in the next, I'll say 3 to 5 years, where you may see flights being canceled. You may see airlines shrinking their schedules because there just aren't enough pilots. And this all started, and my hearts go out. It's the 10-year anniversary of a crash, Colgan Air 3407 crash. My hearts go out to those families, to the people that lost their lives. Absolutely. And out of that crash, there was legislation passed called the 1,500-hour rule. You know about it. I know about it. Everybody in the industry knows about it. But this rule, if you don't know about it, basically said if you don't have 1,500 flight hours, so that means you're in an airplane at the controls. If you don't have 1,500 flight hours, you're not qualified enough. You don't have enough experience to fly an airplane. But, I'm going to quote Erica Armstrong. She's an aviation professor, and aviation professional. She also wrote a book and everything. But I just want to read this one line. The Colgan crash pilots had over 1,500 hours total time each. So hours were irrelevant in that crash. Increasing to 1,500 hours minimum for FOs FOs means for first officers, has created a vicious cycle and pilot shortage, ironically making our skies unsafe again. But they want to pat their backs on these minimum hour rules. End quote. Now, I'll say that quote is, she did not hold back anything in what she posted.
Not at all.
Do I think that 1,500 hours is a good number, a bad number? I have not done enough research. Everything that I'm saying, is really conjecture because you and I, we don't really know. But what I can tell you is that if we look at the cause of that accident, which really could be related back to fatigue,
right.
There were fatigue rules put in place, and that has really stopped the main issue. But the 1,500 hours had nothing to do with that accident. And we're seeing that. And when people are told, you need to build 1,500 hours, and by the way, you're only going to be making $20,000, $25,000 a year as a CFI, nobody's going to want to do it.
No. Well, and then you look at how that goes up the chain, and the main lines are pulling everybody from the regionals, and the regionals are pulling everybody from CFI ranks. Schools are having a hard enough time keeping CFIs on staff, and then having enough to train those that they have in the program as it is.
And I think that's the vicious cycle that she's talking about.
100%. That's exactly what it is.
And you've got Boeing saying that we're going to need 700,000 pilots worldwide in the next 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where we're going to get those pilots. I have no idea.
And I think there are a lot of things that we could say also about the 1,500 rule that would also be conjecture. But I think about, you're looking at pilots, young pilots being trained by other young pilots as well, and that have never been in the airline industry, and that's where they're going. That's where they want to be. They're going to have to learn a whole new system. They're going to have to learn how the airline operates, how it does business, and they're going to have to learn their specifics for their aircraft. I mean, they've got specific procedures, SOPs, and different things that may differ from what they learned as a student and as a CFI. And you're spending that much time being ingrained for 1,500 hours that this is how I do it. And then your world completely changes when you get to the airline industry. So I think there's something to be said about that too, is that, and
you have to break bad habits. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
1,500 hours. If anybody doing something for 1,500 hours, you're going to pick up habits. Whether that's, applying too much, throttle, not, whatever it is, doing the flaps too early.
Exactly.
There's so many issues here where you're now taking that person, you're throwing them into training at the airline, and the airline is saying, and the instructors are saying, we're having to break bad habits. It's taking us, 30 extra hours of sim time to break a person of a habit that they only picked up because they were in a Cessna 172 or in a Pilatus or whatever kind of aircraft we want to talk about for 1,500 hours. And they're so used to that little airplane that now it's a struggle to get them into a commercial aircraft and being trained adequately.
Breaking muscle memory, exactly that habit.
I think, in a future episode, we'll have to get a flight instructor on here and maybe find an instructor at an airline that can talk as well, because this is a big issue. And I mean, I'm looking at an article right now, and you've got Ryanair canceling flights because they don't have pilots. You've got Tiger Air that just this past week is canceling flights every day of the week in Europe for the next few months because they don't have enough pilots. I mean, it's happening, and it's only going to get worse.
Absolutely. Yeah, that projected next 20 years, 15, 20 years, it's going to be very, very hard to maintain our current growth that we have at U.S. carriers specifically.
And you look at, U.S. carriers. We fly probably the majority in the world, but you look at China with the growing middle class, and India, as well as the other Asian Pacific countries that are slowly starting, their middle class is growing. When the middle class grows, those people want to fly more. They want to go travel. You're going to see those countries all of a sudden have such high demand, and we're already seeing it with China. But I'm thinking it's going to explode in the next 10 years, that there's going to be more pilots needed in, the Middle East, Europe, Russia, Asia Pacific than the United States, and we're going to be feeling it. And that's where we're going.
Absolutely. I agree.
I appreciate you taking time out of your day, Ray, and I think we both
this is a platform that I just really enjoy. I think there's something that can be said about sitting down and talking about these things from our perspective. We are professionals in the industry, and we see a lot of things, and our thoughts are our own specifically. But, we see these things and we have thoughts, and I think they need to be shared, and hopefully somebody will get something out of this, whether you're an enthusiast or a professional.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it a little bit, but big, huge disclaimer. Everything I say is my opinion and does not represent the company I work for or any previous employer.
Absolutely. Same for me. These thoughts are our own. So, please interact with us. And we got different social platforms. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. We're on YouTube. Like I said at the beginning, we're trying to give ourselves a refresh and come back stronger than we were before, and put more content out there for you to enjoy. And hopefully we'll see you on the next episode.
Absolutely. And if you guys have any recommendations, or you want to come on the show and talk about things with us, go send us an email, class.bravo.podcast@gmail.com. Again, that's class.bravo.podcast@gmail.com.
It'll be in the show notes as well, so that you can get the exact address.
Exactly. And, classbravo.org is our website. Thanks, guys, and see you on the next podcast.
See ya. Thank you.